Good evening and welcome to the Eden Prairie City Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, May 28th. Please rise and join me in Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item we need to deal with on tonight's agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any changes or requests to modify the agenda? If not, I'll welcome a motion.
I move to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Secondly, we need to approve the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting held on Monday, May 13th, 2009. Are there any modifications, changes, or updates to those minutes? Again, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the Planning Commission meetings minutes from Monday, May 13th, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Tonight, we have one public hearing. The public hearing is on code amendment for solar systems. The request is to amend the City Code Chapter 11 relating to solar systems as permitted as accessory uses. Julie, are you going to present this to us?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, as part of the Sustainable Eden Prairie initiative that the City and City Council have been working with, City staff is working with staff from the Metropolitan Council and the Soul Smart program in order to determine if the city could apply for a Soul Smart designation. Through that program, there are multiple levels of recognition, including gold, silver, and bronze. And through multiple efforts that the city has already undertaken as a part of that process, we've learned that we as a city could be eligible for a Gold Star designation if there was a modification that was made to our city code, specifically to state that solar uses or solar energy systems are a permitted accessory use explicitly stated in the zoning ordinance. Now, by practice, that's what the city currently allows. That's how we regulate solar energy systems as a permitted accessory use and apply the appropriate setbacks and height restrictions that go with that. So it's not a change in practice by amending the code as staff is presenting this evening. So the code amendment includes providing a definition for solar energy systems and then adding language in a section of the zoning ordinance that pertains to all zoning districts, saying that solar energy systems would be a permitted accessory use. If the amendment is approved, staff would then be able to apply for a gold designation through the Soul Smart program. So I understand that the amendment that's before you is not overly prescriptive. It is very broad. That is what is intended through this amendment, and it by no means indicates that it would be our last or our only code amendment to regulate solar as that Sustainable Eden Prairie effort continues and solar technologies continue to expand and change. So staff is recommending approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Julie. Any questions?
Yeah. What's the difference between the gold and silver and bronze? What's the...
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, between those three designations, it indicates the efforts that the city has made in order to promote and incentivize different alternative energy sources and programs throughout the community. So I can't speak to it in as much detail as, say, the sustainability coordinator that's been working on this program as a part of Sustainable Eden Prairie. But I do know that we did have a solar energy audit that was completed by the Metropolitan Council Soul Smart representatives, and they've taken a look at our zoning ordinance and done other audits as well in order to help us through this effort, and this was a recommendation that came out of that audit.
Other questions?
Mine's maybe a little bit more a grammatical question, I think. So there's this list of 4 definitions for energy systems. And the bottom 3, the ground-mounted, roof-mounted, wall-mounted, are those 3 all different types of active solar energy systems? And I guess I just ran into a little bit of confusion as to if something is it mutually exclusive, or is, again, one of those 3 just different types of active solar energy? If so, maybe there's some clarification into how this is worded so it's clear that each one of these is a different type of system.
Commissioner Meddy, members of the commission, the ground-mounted, roof-mounted, and wall-mounted are all part of the active energy solar systems. So one is a broader definition, and then the other 3 are subsets. If you see down below on page 2 of your memo where it talks about amending section 1103 subdivision 3, you'll find the roof-mounted, wall-mounted, and ground-mounted referenced in that section of the amendment. So those definitions are really intended to help staff understand, based on the type of system that is proposed, which setback requirements would be, setback and height requirements would be applicable. So for instance, if it was a roof-mounted, even though the solar energy system is an accessory use, it would be regulated by the primary structure height and setbacks. Because, say for instance, in a residential district, a primary structure has a height restriction of, let's say, 30 feet. An accessory structure has a height restriction of 15 feet. So by defining it as a roof-mounted system, you'd be able to put solar panels on the roof of a primary structure or a home and not worry about being in violation of that 15-foot height requirement of an accessory structure. So it provides more clarity down the road as to which regulations apply to which systems.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. Commissioner DeSantis.
Julie, my question has to do with language again. The adjective accessory, does that imply that any rewrite of the code would only permit secondary use of solar and not as a principal source of energy for a structure or planned unit development?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's a great question and one that we contemplated as we were working on this code amendment. So as an accessory use, as defined by code, it would mean that there would have to be a primary use on the site. So as Public Works Director Ellis talked about last meeting with you, there are some discussions in play with regard to the potential to do solar energy on the former landfill site. And even in that case, that could be an accessory use because the primary use of the site is a landfill, or was a landfill. So in the event that we are ever presented with an opportunity to do solar as a permitted primary use, that would likely be handled either through a further code amendment or through a PUD, because it is something that certainly is of great interest to the city.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Julie. I have a few questions here. Following up on something that Commissioner Meddy was talking about regarding the clarity of the grammar. For the ground mounted, roof mounted, and wall mounted, each one of them defines solar differently. One is a freestanding solar system, one is a solar conversion system, and one is a system located on the wall of a building. Do you mean, should this be more accurate to say that each of them are active solar energy systems? Would that provide more clarity?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think that referring to those 3 as all being part of an active energy solar system, yes, would provide more clarity.
Okay. Where did these definitions come from?
So as a part, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as a part of the research that staff did, as a part of this overall effort and the guidance that was given to the city as part of the Soul Smart program, the information that's presented to you this evening is a combination of research of approximately 10 cities that we looked at that had gone through similar efforts, and as well as some of the feedback that was given to the city through the zoning ordinance audit.
Okay, so the reason why I asked that question is because I'm having a hard time understanding the practical implications of the words in the active solar energy system. Mainly because I think the word energy is probably being misused from a technical perspective. There's a difference between energy, electricity, and I would want to make sure that the words are accurately reflecting what technically is happening with the conversion of light into electricity. The second component is, and since it's very broad, I suspect I know the answer to this question. So it says primary purpose is to harvest energy by transforming solar energy into another form of energy. Would that include storing it in a battery?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it could mean storing it in a battery, yes.
Should that be clarified in the language?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that could be clarified. I guess I would want to have a further conversation to understand the position or the question being presented by the commission.
Okay, so the reason why I'm bringing up is what is occurring with the majority, well, across the country, what's occurring with a lot of rooftop solar is that they're being paired with a battery to better integrate the variability of solar into the distribution system. So instead of having the power just be generated when the sun's shining and then whatever is not consumed by the house go on the distribution system, the excess energy is then stored in a battery for discharge later. And so I wonder if it would be reasonable to consider having an additional language related to the use of battery systems, battery storage systems, to be done in conjunction with an active solar energy system, to recognize that the energy systems can be paired with a battery. And I think that would most definitely satisfy many of the goals of the Soul Smart system, because this does encourage more solar and encourages more batteries and encourages less, or it discourages or decreases the potential harm that would happen to the distribution system. So that'd be something to consider.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, with regard to Commissioner Villarreal's comments, I don't believe that based on the language that you have in front of you, that if a system came forward that included a battery, that would be prohibited by this language. You know, as I stated early on, this language is intended to be broad, because if we get too prescriptive then as technologies change or there's an interest in pursuing a particular type of technology, we don't want to be in a situation where we have to tell somebody who's interested and able to do solar, well, that doesn't exactly fit with our definition, so therefore you can't do it, or you need to go through a process in order to be able to do it. The whole point of the amendment is to not only make it clear that it is a permissible use, but to promote it and encourage folks to do it with minimal barriers and not have to go through a variance process or any additional permitting other than a typical administrative building permit.
And one last question.
Okay.
So I agree with all that, and I guess the what I'm trying to get is making sure that the words on the paper are accurate. My last question follows up on something Commissioner DeSantis was talking about, and your answer raised some concerns about whether this would be sufficient to allow community solar, which is something that is encouraged under the state law, which is putting large solar arrays in open spots for development. And so I'd want to try to make sure that this language is not inadvertently discouraging community solar installations.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this language is certainly not intended to discourage that. As we talked about through the Aspire process, the city has created a new land use category in the comp plan called eco-innovation, and has guided for instance, the former landfill site for that use, and staff will be preparing a zoning district text that goes along with that particular land use guiding. Now, because the map at this time only guides the landfill site for that type of use, the intent as we're drafting the zoning regulations is to keep in mind that that land use designation could be applied to other properties that may be appropriate as the community ages, evolves, and other properties become maybe available or suited for that type of use. So as we are working on drafting that language, we will certainly be keeping that in mind. But the language that you have before you this evening is certainly not intended to prohibit or discourage community solar use, but rather that would be handled through another mechanism. This amendment is intended to promote it on a smaller scale, whether that's individual businesses or homeowners, things of that sort.
Oh, okay. Because that doesn't say that in here.
Let me just ask this. Is the amendment we're talking about is related to the actual system itself for zoning purposes? In other words, we're not talking about solar energy specifically or necessarily in adopting this amendment. We're talking about where the device sits on a property as it relates to the zoning requirements. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think I'm following the logic in that the question essentially is that the language that's before you this evening is not talking about the science of creating energy, but rather how to regulate it based on where it's located and what's the appropriate regulations to apply based on its location. And I would say that's an accurate statement, yes.
And perhaps just what I might suggest in terms of the battery is that the active solar energy system, in terms of transferring heat from a collector into another medium, I would say another medium would encompass a battery pretty.
Can I jump on that as well? Because I think I'm in the same vein that you are. I think when it says chemical actually in there, to me that implied a battery when I read it.
So
When I'm taking the solar energy and into another medium, it's electrical but also potentially chemical, and a battery is a chemical reaction.
I agree, but you're not transferring heat into the battery. You're transferring electrons.
True.
And so that's why I agree with everything Commissioner Weber said, that what we're talking about is the location of things. But my concern is that if the words describing those things is potentially how that might be interpreted by people who want to install solar is maybe unclear. So if I wanted to put a battery, which is not transferring heat, it's transferring electrons.
Transforming solar energy into another form of energy or transferring heat from a collector into another media. So I saw it allowing both. I saw it encompassing both.
I'll just chime in and agree that I don't think this precludes the use of a battery in a system. I mean, it's certainly something we could tag on to clarify, but I don't think it's precluding it, which is the important thing that you're trying to prevent. I think that maybe one way, if we're talking about specifically how to address this, we could say that the system whose primary purpose is to harvest energy by transforming solar energy into another form of energy or energy storage. And then also, I think the second half of this sentence, the transferring heat from a collector, is talking about the rooftop where you have water pipe, like if you have a solar water heated thing.
Heater.
So that's an entirely different type of system. But anyway, I would propose that as potentially hope. I don't know if you think that would solve the question or not. And then I'll just chime in on the other conversation too. This whole section relates to solar as an accessory use. So Julie, I'm not 100% clear on what you're saying. Do we have then solar as a primary use addressed in the code, or is that what we're going to be adding?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is what we would be adding through the creation of the eco-innovation zoning district that would allow for that use.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Julie, just to pivot a little bit, the paragraph in which the sentence, "The Soul Smart program is incentivizing communities to amend their codes," what does the city staff have in mind in terms of financial incentives, particularly for large-scale business projects?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm not aware that there are any city-initiated financial incentives. There may be other incentives through electric providers, but I'm not aware that the city is looking to offer those at this point. That's not to say that in the future, as part of Sustainable Eden Prairie, that won't evolve. As you know, we're in the very beginning stages of Sustainable Eden Prairie, and the City Council has charged the Conservation Commission with reviewing a variety of different ways and measures in order to put those in place, and the Conservation Commission will be making some recommendations over the course of 2019 to the City Council for their consideration as a part of the Sustainable Eden Prairie program.
Given that this is a public hearing, is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak regarding this topic? Not seeing anyone. Any final additional comments or questions from the commission?
I'll throw one thing out to, again, I think I'm having a problem with, I guess it's mainly the grammar. So I'm wondering if, and the grammar police can let me know if this is a good grammatically correct sentence. If a comma should be entered after the word energy and before the word or, and then another comma after the word collector. If that would, I think that might provide some additional clarity. I don't know.
I'm okay with that. I agree.
Can you help me with the first reference? I found the second one, but I didn't find the first one.
Yeah, sure. In the first bullet for active solar energy system, the second line that starts transforming solar energy into another form of energy, putting a comma there, and then putting the second comma after the word collector.
So it would read transforming solar energy into another form of energy, comma, or transferring heat from a collector to another
Comma.
Heat to a collector, comma.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
My computer just went blank right as I was reading it.
Yes, that's correct.
So the second comma is after a collector.
After collector, yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would be, from a staff perspective, I think that is acceptable and is following the spirit and intent of the amendment as presented.
Any other questions or comments? I guess we're at a point where we need a motion, and I think that motion needs to include the slight modification that we just discussed.
Okay. I'll move to close the public hearing.
Second?
A motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is closed.
I'll move to recommend approval of the code amendment for solar energy systems based on recommendations from staff report dated May 22nd, 2019, with the amendment to add a comma after the word energy in the second energy in the second line of the definition active solar energy system, and another comma after the word collector in the second line of the definition of active solar energy system.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. With that, that's our final public hearing. Julie, any planners reports?
No, sir.
Any members reports?
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Julie, would it, I was on the Planning Commission webpage today because I wanted to send out this definition onto Twitter to see what the solar folks on my Twitter and energy Twitter was thinking about. And I couldn't find it, and there's no agenda. The agendas aren't regularly posted onto the webpage, so I'm wondering if that's...
Mr. Chair, members of the
At
commission.
least I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I certainly can check, but typically they're posted on the calendar. So if you go to the city's calendar, there will be a note that says Planning Commission on May, what's today, 28th, 7 p.m. And if you click on that, then you'll get the agenda and all of the agenda materials.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the Planning Commission meeting for May 28th, 2019.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.